There's something about old hotels that feels different. It's not just the faded wallpaper or the brass door handles that never quite shine. It's the way the air seems still, like it's holding its breath, like it's keeping a secret. In the town of Stonebridge, a place you probably wouldn't find unless you were looking, there's one such hotel. Red brick, 4 stories, with a chipped sign that reads, "The Winton Inn." It used to be charming in a forgotten sort of way, the kind of place couples might stay at during a road trip when chain hotels were full or too expensive. A place for passing through, not staying long. In the summer of 2000, a couple checked into room 209. Their names were Owen and Lillian Carter. He was 34, she was 31. Newly married, still laughing at each other's bad jokes, still taking blurry photos on disposable cameras. They were on their way to visit Lillian's aunt across state lines. Stonebridge was just a stop for the night. A bed, a shower, maybe breakfast in the morning. They were never seen again. No checkout, no calls. The room was locked from the inside. When hotel staff finally entered the next afternoon, it was empty. Their car was still in the lot, bags neatly packed, untouched. No sign of struggle, no spilled coffee or misplaced shoes. Just the eerie sense that something had left or something had taken. The investigation lasted months. Dogs, divers, helicopters. Nothing, not a single trace. No fingerprints out of place, no DNA, no notes, no security footage showing them leave. Room 209 became a legend in Stonebridge, a hushed warning among locals. Kids dared each other to knock on the door. Staff refused to clean it alone. And eventually, like all unsolved things, it became silence. A new coat of paint, a new lock, and time moved on. Until last year. In 2025, 25 years after Owen and Lillian vanished without a trace, something happened. The hotel had been closed for renovations, new owners, new vision, trying to turn the Winton into a boutique getaway. As workers gutted the second floor, they reached room 209. They opened the door, expecting dust and old carpet. What they found instead was cement. The entire room, floor to ceiling, had been sealed, not with drywall or boards or even bricks. Cement. Thick, solid, seamless. Every surface encased in gray. The walls, the floor, even the windows. As if the room had been buried while still standing. As if it had been erased. And in the middle of the room, embedded in the cement like fossils, were 2 objects. A gold necklace with the letter L and a plastic camera. Cracked, cloudy, but intact. The workers stopped. Authorities were called, and once again, Stonebridge held its breath. How does a room in an operating hotel get sealed in concrete without anyone knowing? Who did it, when, and most importantly, why? What was in that camera? Why was there no record of the renovation? And had room 209 ever really been empty? Or had something been hidden there all along? The discovery reopened wounds, questions, fears that had been buried as carefully as the room itself. But to understand what really happened in room 209, we have to go back. It always starts like this, not with a scream or a siren or flashing lights, but with something so ordinary, so gentle, that you almost miss the moment everything began to slip away. Owen Carter was a school teacher, 7th grade science. The kind of teacher who wore checkered shirts and had a drawer full of string and batteries just in case a kid's project needed saving. He liked rock collecting and bad puns. Every spring he ran the science fair. He wasn't the kind of man who stood out in a crowd, but in a classroom he lit up. Lillian was different. She worked in a photo lab back when film still mattered. She had a laugh that people described as contagious, and she wore too many rings for comfort. Her hands were always stained with developing chemicals, and she kept a little notebook full of faces, people she'd seen once and didn't want to forget. She said every stranger had a story. She liked imagining how they ended. The two met at a bookstore, reaching for the same copy of The Time Machine. Owen joked that they'd have to build one to share it. Lillian said he could take the book if he promised to return it. Over coffee. That was 5 years before the hotel. By 2000, they were 2 years married, saving for a house with a porch swing, talking about maybe, finally, getting a dog. It was late July when they got in the car and started driving from their home in Pennsylvania to Lillian's aunt's place near Asheville. It wasn't a long trip, but they decided to make it feel like one. One last detour before responsibilities set in. Owen brought maps. Lillian brought her camera. They stopped at antique stores and roadside diners. They camped once in a field, just because the sky was clear. The last known photo of them wasn't dramatic. It was taken by a waitress outside a place called Daisy's Diner. Lillian's holding a strawberry milkshake, grinning into the sun. Owen's making a peace sign. There's ketchup on his shirt. That was July 23rd. That night, they didn't make it as far as planned. There was road construction, a detour, and the sun had already set. Owen pulled into Stonebridge looking for a place to sleep. The town was small, fewer than 8,000 people. Just one grocery store, a high school, and a string of red brick buildings along Main Street. The Winton Inn stood at the edge of town, next to an old train station that hadn't worked in decades. They checked in just after 10 p.m. The night manager on duty was a man named Howard Trigg. He remembered them because they seemed happy. Normal. Young couple, polite, tired from driving, paid in cash, asked for a quiet room, maybe one with a view of the trees. He gave them 209. End of the hall, second floor, corner window facing the woods. They signed the logbook. Howard remembered Lillian humming as she walked away. Owen made a joke about the key being so big it could unlock a castle. They laughed. He watched them walk down the corridor and disappear around the bend. That was the last time anyone saw them. Room 209 had no complaints that night. No calls to the front desk. No disturbances. The next morning, housekeeping skipped the room. The Do Not Disturb sign was hanging. At noon, it was still there. By 3 p.m., Howard knocked. No answer. Still, nothing felt wrong. It wasn't until 5 p.m. that anyone entered. The door was locked from the inside. Not just latched, locked. Howard used the master key. When he opened it, he expected to find them asleep or gone. Instead, he found nothing. The room was empty. Not empty like vacant, empty like untouched. The bed was made, the blinds closed. The TV remote was still on the nightstand. Their bags were at the foot of the bed, zipped. There was no trash in the bin, no clothes in the bathroom, no sign they had even used the shower. It looked like no one had stayed there at all. But the logbook said otherwise. And so did the car still parked outside, a blue Honda Civic with Pennsylvania plates, registered to Owen Carter. Local police were called. At first it was routine. Maybe they'd left early, maybe they'd wandered into town, maybe something spooked them. But then came the questions. Why would they leave their car? Their bags? Why no one had seen them on the street? Why didn't they check out? And how could they have left when the door was locked from the inside? There were no hidden passages, no service entrances. The windows were sealed shut. Only one opened barely and led to a sheer drop into a patch of overgrown shrubs and rock. It was 25 feet down, not survivable if jumped. They interviewed Howard, then the housekeeper, then the cook, the dishwasher, the guests in 207 and 2011. No one had heard anything. No shouting, no dragging, no footsteps in the hallway, no sound at all. They searched the hotel, every room, every floor, the roof, the basement. They brought in dogs, scent trackers. Nothing. They scoured the woods behind the hotel, Found beer cans, a raccoon skeleton, a broken toy car. No sign of Lillian or Owen. They questioned the town. Local rumors sprang up fast. Some said it was aliens, others a cult. A few whispered about a man who used to live in room 209 back in the 1950s who went missing too, but there were no records to back that up. Just stories, just shadows. Owen's parents flew in. Lillian's sister, too. They sat in the parking lot and cried, held up pictures, told reporters that the couple had no enemies, no debts, no reason to run, that Owen still had his last paycheck on him, uncashed, that Lillian had left behind a roll of film she planned to develop when they got home. The case grew cold before it even had time to warm. The Carter disappearance joined the long, strange list of unsolved vanishings. Theories ran wild. TV specials came and went. A few amateur sleuths visited the hotel, took photos outside room 209, knocked on the door. Some swore they heard something knock back. Then years passed. The Winton changed owners twice. The room was repainted, then closed. Eventually, the hotel itself fell into disrepair. The only guests were time and silence. But the question remained, what happened in room 209? It's a strange thing, how time seems to bend around a mystery. Days stretch, minutes echo. And in Stonebridge, the summer of 2000 became a long, trembling question that no one could answer. By the third day after the couple vanished, the Carter case was already attracting headlines. "Married couple vanishes without a trace," the newspapers said. "Hotel room locked from inside. No exit found." But those were just words, clicks, whispers. In Stonebridge, it felt like the town itself had stopped breathing. The Winton Inn shut its doors for a week. Police tape fluttered in the hot breeze. Officers moved in and out like shadows. And room 209 became something else entirely. Not a place, but a presence. Inside, nothing had changed. The bags were still there, perfectly zipped. Lillian's favorite cardigan was folded inside the blue one. Owen's razor and glasses, undisturbed. On the nightstand, a mint had melted slightly in its wrapper. The air smelled faintly of lavender, old wood, and something else no one could name. Forensics teams scanned every inch. No blood, no prints other than their own, no signs of forced entry, violence, or even fear. The only anomaly was the door. It had been locked from the inside, chain latch drawn, deadbolt turned. A key card was found inside the room, their only one. Security logs were checked. The last time the lock was activated was 10:12 p.m. the night they arrived. After that, nothing. The hallway outside had no cameras, common for a small-town hotel in 2000. But investigators did find footage from the lobby. At 10:05 p.m., Owen and Lillian were seen approaching the front desk. At 10:09, they were handed a key and pointed toward the elevator. The elevator's camera had been broken for years. They never appeared again. It was like the hallway had swallowed them whole. Detectives brought in dogs trained to track scent. They sniffed the bags, the clothes, even the sheets. One of the dogs, a bloodhound named Ace, sat down at the bathroom door and began to whine. But there was nothing inside, just a sink, a towel still folded, and 2 unopened hotel soaps. They searched the crawl spaces, the HVAC system, the hotel's basement. They even drained a nearby retention pond. Divers went down into dark, murky water, resurfacing with nothing but trash and silence. Every possible route of escape was explored. Could they have climbed out the window? The old sash barely budged and would have required force to open wide enough. Could someone have dragged them out without a trace? Unlikely. Not with no sounds, no struggle, no DNA. Could they have left voluntarily? That question lingered longest. But why leave your bags, your car, your money? Why leave your entire life behind in the middle of the night? And lock the door behind you. The idea of a voluntary disappearance unraveled quickly. Lillian's purse was still in the room. Owen's wallet, too. Their IDs, their last pay stubs. Every trace said they had intended to come back. Yet no one saw them again. On the 5th day, the Carters were officially classified as missing persons. Owen's parents, Martha and George, held a press conference outside the hotel. They stood behind a podium borrowed from the town hall. Martha's hands trembled as she held up a photo of her son in his graduation cap. She said, "My son is not the kind of man who just vanishes. Something happened in that room." Lillian's sister, Natalie, stood beside her. She said Lillian had been excited about visiting their aunt, that she'd never miss the chance to show off her wedding album, that she was working on a photo essay about forgotten places, and the Winton Inn had been on her list. Theories began to form like condensation on glass. Some believed it was a kidnapping, a mistake, a professional job gone wrong. But there was no ransom, no calls, no threats, nothing to suggest anyone even noticed them until they were gone. Others thought maybe the couple had discovered something, heard something. Maybe someone entered the room through means no one could understand. Or maybe they were never in the room at all. That's when things started to get stranger. 2 weeks after the disappearance, a man came forward. He was staying in room 207 that night, just 2 doors down. He claimed he heard something around midnight, not shouting or banging, but music, faint, almost distant. A lullaby, he said, playing from behind the walls. But when police checked with the hotel's records, there were no speakers wired into that part of the building. No guest had reported music. No staff had entered that area. The man's claim was dismissed as imagination. Still, others began to share stories. A maid said she always felt uneasy in room 209, claimed that sometimes the lights flickered, even when the bulbs were new. Another guest, years prior, had left a note in the comment card box. Room 209 needs a priest, not a painter. That card was never filed. By the end of the summer, the town had grown tired of the mystery. Tourists came by just to take photos of the hotel. Paranormal bloggers wrote articles. Ghost hunters filmed episodes. The Carters' families hired private investigators, but none of them found anything new. Room 209 was sealed off in the fall of that year. The door locked, the windows boarded, the number taken off the plaque. For years it was used for storage, a forgotten room in a hotel that was slowly falling apart. And the story faded. Owen and Lillian Carter, once described as inseparable and smiling, became a paragraph in missing persons databases. Their families moved, remarried, grew older. The case was technically still open, but with no leads and no suspects, there was nothing left to do. But for those who had been there, those who had knocked on that door, stared into that room, or flipped through their wedding album, it was never truly over. And then came the cement. Years passed like dust settling on an untouched bookshelf, slowly, quietly, until even the noise of loss became background. By 2002, the Carter case was old news, not closed, not forgotten, just faded, like a picture left in the sun. Stonebridge had returned to its rhythm. Kids went back to school. The Winton Inn reopened with fewer rooms available and fewer guests interested in asking questions. Room 209 remained locked, but not everyone let go. George and Martha Carter moved closer to town, renting a small one-bedroom on the outskirts of Stonebridge. They wanted to be nearby in case anything surfaced. At first, they visited the police station once a week, then once a month, then only when someone called them. The hope didn't die. It just changed form. It turned into habits, routines, lighting a candle every Sunday, leaving Owen's voicemail active just in case. Martha kept a binder, a thick blue binder that grew heavier with the years. Newspaper clippings, emails, sketches of the hotel layout, screenshots from online forums. She said every case has a trail, no matter how faint. George built model airplanes, small ones, delicate, always in blue. He said it helped him remember the days Owen and he used to fly kites in the spring. Lillian's sister, Natalie, went another way. She started a blog, Where is Room 209? It began as a digital journal, but slowly turned into something else, a gathering place for the curious, the grieving, the obsessed. She wrote detailed posts, cross-referenced timelines, connected it to other missing persons cases that occurred in or around hotels. She published theories, letters from strangers, even anonymous tips. Some were touching, others were terrifying. One message, sent in 2007, simply read, "Not all rooms are meant to be entered twice." She reported it to police. They traced the IP to a public library in Kansas. Nothing came of it. For the most part, the years between 2000 and 2010 were marked by silence. Every few years, a new detective would take the file, open it, flip through it, and return it to the drawer. The working theory remained unchanged. Unexplained disappearance, likely foul play, no suspects, no trace. But silence doesn't mean stillness. In 2011, the hotel was sold again. The new owners tried to renovate, but local contractors refused to work on room 209. Not because they believed in ghosts, they said, but because of what they'd seen over the years. Lights flickering, doors that wouldn't stay shut, tools going missing only to be found inside the locked room. There was a brief push to reopen the investigation after a tourist claimed to see a figure in the second-floor window, a woman in white, standing perfectly still behind the curtain. But by the time staff checked, the room was empty, as it always was. Still, the story endured in strange ways. In 2013, a local podcast covered the case. They called it The Room That Swallowed Two People. It gained traction, not because of new evidence, but because of the way it made people feel. Listeners flooded the comment sections with their own hotel stories, their own brush with unexplained moments. A few claimed they had also stayed at the Winton in the late 90s and recalled odd smells, strange dreams, or waking to find the door open when they knew they'd locked it. The podcast revived interest. A few amateur sleuths began to investigate on their own. They took pictures of blueprints, interviewed former staff, reached out to Natalie. Some believed the room had been altered after the fact. Others thought it was built wrong to begin with, that its dimensions didn't match the exterior, that 209 wasn't supposed to exist at all. Natalie updated her blog, grateful that people still cared. But it also frightened her, because the more people talked, the darker the story seemed to become. By 2018, the Winton had become more of a relic than a business. Bookings slowed, the paint peeled. A local real estate developer tried to buy the property and turn it into apartments, but the deal fell through. Too many legal complications, too many rumors. And then came 2020. The 20th anniversary of the disappearance. Natalie hosted a live stream. She read old letters, displayed the police sketches, showed Owen and Lillian's wedding photos. Over 10,000 people tuned in. Many offered condolences. Others offered leads, most of them useless. But one stood out. A user named GhostFrame43 posted a single sentence in the chat. "You're looking in the wrong time, not the wrong place." No explanation, no follow-up. Natalie traced the username. It was linked to an abandoned Reddit account that had once posted on a time-travel conspiracy forum. The message was dismissed as nonsense, but it stayed with her. By 2023, even she had started to burn out. Grief can become a kind of shadow. You live beside it long enough, you start to forget what sunlight looks like. She stopped updating the blog. Martha stopped adding to her binder. George stopped building planes. And room 209 stayed locked. Until one June morning in 2025, when a construction crew arrived with blueprints in hand, hard hats on, and no memory of the couple who had vanished 25 years before. They were there to begin renovations. New floors, new walls, fresh paint, clean slate. But the second floor wouldn't cooperate. Room 209's door was different. It had been painted over twice, the hinges rusted, and when they finally forced it open, what they saw stopped everything. The room wasn't dusty, it wasn't messy, it was sealed, not metaphorically, literally. A gray wall of hardened cement stood where the room should have been. Seamless, cold, smooth to the touch. They thought it was a wall at first, a construction mistake, but when they knocked, it echoed. Not like drywall, not like plaster, like a tomb. The rediscovery of room 209 didn't just stir the dust, it cracked the foundation of every assumption ever made about the Carters' disappearance. Once the story hit the news again, hotel room found, sealed in cement after 25 years, everything exploded. Not just in Stonebridge, but everywhere. True crime forums lit up. Reddit threads multiplied by the hour. TikTok psychics claimed visions. Podcasters scheduled emergency episodes. People love a mystery, but they live for a mystery that refuses to die. And suddenly, the Carters were alive again. Not in body, but in theory. Natalie reopened her blog for the first time in over 2 years. Her inbox filled within hours. Not just condolences this time, diagrams, theories, even maps. Everyone had a version of what had happened. Everyone thought they were close to the truth. Some were grounded in logic, others in something else entirely. The first theory that took hold was the simplest. Someone, somehow, had murdered the couple and sealed the room as a cover-up. It had the weight of physical truth, concrete, literal. Cold. Maybe it was a hotel worker, a guest, a serial killer passing through. Maybe the couple heard or saw something they shouldn't have, stumbled into the wrong moment at the wrong time. But even that raised questions. How do you seal an entire room in a functioning hotel without anyone noticing? Without noise? Without hauling in hundreds of pounds of dry cement, mixing tools, water? In secret? And when? The hotel had been open for years after their disappearance. No reports of loud renovations, no sign of wet paint. The official records didn't show any construction permits filed. There was no record, legal or whispered, of anyone ever having walled off that room. And yet, it was sealed, perfectly, smooth to the touch, like it had always been that way. That's when the theories started to drift from reality. A man on a paranormal podcast proposed something he called the architect of silence theory, that certain places, rooms, buildings, entire zones, don't exist in the way we understand them. That 209 was never a room at all, but a fold, a scar in time, a place that occasionally opens and swallows what enters. He claimed other disappearances had happened under similar circumstances, rooms with no exit, locked doors, luggage left behind. Look for the places where time doesn't echo right, he said, where clocks feel wrong, where people vanish into stillness. That episode was shared over 500,000 times. Another theory suggested Room 209 was part of a government black site, used in the past for psychological experiments or witness protection. The couple, perhaps, had been mistaken for someone else, or maybe they weren't as innocent as they seemed. Maybe Owen wasn't a teacher. Maybe Lillian didn't just develop photos. Maybe they'd been hiding something. This theory gained traction after a self-proclaimed former intelligence agent claimed to have stayed at the Winton in 1999 and said he heard things at night, tapping, whispers. Once, he said, he saw a man in a gray suit step out of room 209 and vanish. No way to confirm it, no way to refute it. But that's how theories survive, in the spaces Facts won't fill. Then there was the time slip theory. A strange and growing camp of believers claimed that the Carters never left the room because they never had the chance. That something tore in the fabric of reality, that the room didn't swallow them in space, it swallowed them in time. These theorists pointed to the final entries in Lillian's travel notebook, found in her luggage. The last page read, "The room smells like bleach and static. I feel like I'm standing still, but the world's moving around me." It had a timestamp, 11:11 p.m., July 23rd. A few believers fixated on that number. 11:11, a classic sign in spiritual and paranormal circles, an invitation, a doorway. They claimed Lillian had felt the shift. That she knew. Others pointed out a blog post Natalie had written in 2004 in which she recalled a dream. Lillian standing in a concrete room, trying to speak through the wall, her fingers bleeding from clawing at the stone. Natalie said it was just a dream, but believers said dreams don't lie, especially not when they match the truth, 21 years before it's discovered. More practically minded sleuths turned to architectural theory. They pulled old blueprints of the Winton, scanned the floor plan of the second story, but every diagram they found, from 1979, 1985, 1994, listed 209 as a regular room. Same square footage, same window, same plumbing, nothing secret, nothing strange, except one. A blueprint dated 1954, the earliest available, had room 209 labeled inaccessible. No door, no hallway connection, just a blank square with a faint pencil note. Sealed. No one could find out why. Records from the 50s had long been lost in a courthouse fire. The architect of that renovation had died in 1972. And the hotel manager at the time? A man named Walter Tim, who, curiously, had also disappeared in 1955. No one ever connected that dot. Not until now. Online forums erupted with connections, missing persons cases, overlapping timelines. A guest named Evelyn Horner, who vanished in 1978 after checking into room 207. A maid who quit suddenly in 1989 after seeing something crawl under the carpet. A priest who stayed for one night in 1993 and refused to ever return. But none of it could be proven. None of it stopped what had happened to Owen and Lillian. Natalie tried to sift through it all. She bookmarked posts, printed maps, wrote notes on sticky pads. But as the days went on, she started to feel it again. The old familiar ache, the grief of not knowing, the haunting sensation that truth was only inches away, hiding behind the walls. One Reddit user put it perfectly. There's something worse than losing someone. It's losing them in a place where they're never supposed to be lost, in a room that shouldn't exist, a door that should have led to a bed and a lamp, but opened into nothing. The first crack came not with a bang, but with a camera. After the crew at the Winton Inn uncovered the cement wall sealing room 209, construction was halted immediately. Police were called, local authorities, then state investigators. Word spread like oil on water. By the time forensic teams arrived, the building was surrounded with yellow tape and quiet panic. Room 209 was no longer just a story. It was now a crime scene. They brought in experts, engineers, preservationists, structural analysts. No one had ever seen anything like it. The entire room had been encased in concrete, floor, walls, ceiling, with such precision that it seemed architectural, deliberate, and worse. The concrete was old, aged. It had settled, cracked faintly, hardened years ago. They estimated it had been poured within 6 months of the Carters' disappearance. Inside, embedded like ancient artifacts, were 3 items. The first was a gold necklace, twisted slightly, the chain caught in the upper layer of concrete. It bore a small letter L, just like the one Lillian had worn in photos. The second was a plastic disposable camera, the kind you'd buy at a gas station, faded, the label nearly peeled away. The third was a piece of cloth, blue denim, badly worn, possibly the sleeve of a jacket. The camera was the first thing they focused on. It was delivered, under guard, to a forensic photography lab. The film inside was still intact. Carefully, slowly, technicians developed each frame, some overexposed, some blurry. The first few were unremarkable. A diner, a highway, Owen laughing at something out of frame, Lillian posing with her feet in a stream, all part of the road trip. Moments of joy preserved in flickering amber and grain. Then came the last photo, taken inside a room. Not just any room. That room. Room 209, just before it had been sealed. The picture was crooked, dimensois, likely taken in a hurry, but it showed enough. The floral wallpaper, the edge of the nightstand, and in the middle of the frame, slightly out of focus, Owen. He was standing, one hand raised as if to shield his eyes. His expression wasn't fear, not exactly. It was confusion. Something about his face suggested he didn't understand what he was seeing, or why he was seeing it. Behind him, the wall was wrong, blurred, dark, and not quite flat, as if something had been pulling inward, like the room itself was folding at the edges. There was no sign of Lillian in the photo. Technicians confirmed the timestamp. July 23, 2000, 11:17 p.m., 6 minutes after Lillian had written her final note in her travel journal. The photo was released to Natalie first. She stared at it for hours before speaking. She said it felt like grief and relief crashed together, that seeing his face, one last time, was a gift wrapped in dread. Then she noticed something no one else had. In the upper right corner of the photo, almost completely obscured by shadow, was a shape, a figure, too blurred to identify. Not Owen, taller, standing still. Natalie circled it, sent it to analysts. Some said it was just light distortion. Others weren't so sure. The photo was made public a week later. Online communities erupted, frame-by-frame breakdowns, AI enhancements. Some believed it showed a second person, an intruder. Others claimed it was Lillian, mid-motion. A few said it wasn't a person at all. But the photo brought one certainty. The Carters had been inside room 209 the night they vanished. Not in the hallway, not outside. In the room, awake, alert. And the photo had been taken right before something happened. The media pounced. News vans returned to Stonebridge. The Winton Inn became a circus of cables, cameras, and conspiracy. Old staff members were re-interviewed, blueprints re-examined. Even the concrete was tested, layer by layer, to determine when and how it had been poured. What they found deep within the concrete shocked everyone. Tiny fragments of hotel wallpaper, compacted between layers of mix. This wasn't a prefabricated barrier. It had been poured directly into the room, as if someone had walked in with bags of cement and encased the space from within. But again, how? There was no construction equipment logged, no receipts, no visual record, no noise complaints, no smell of wet mix. It was as if someone had done it in complete silence, invisibly, and in less than 24 hours. Investigators tried to recreate the process in a warehouse. It took 6 men and nearly 10 hours to replicate the cementing of a similar-sized space. And even then, their result lacked the seamless quality of room 209, which left only 2 options. Either someone had done the impossible, or the room itself had changed. That's when they found the last item. Buried in the floor, barely protruding from the cement, was a strange metal object, rusty, worn, misshapen, a door latch. But not the kind from 2000. It matched a design patented in 1951, the kind used on older internal locking doors, the kind that would have been used in the Winton Inn before the renovation. Investigators compared it to records from the 1954 blueprint, the one that listed room 209 as inaccessible. A theory began to form. What if the room hadn't just been sealed once? What if room 209 had been entombed before, opened again, and then sealed permanently? Natalie said it best in a post. Maybe this wasn't the first time room 209 tried to take someone. Maybe it's just the first time it succeeded. The discovery of the latch changed everything. Suddenly, investigators weren't just looking at a sealed crime scene. They were looking at a pattern, a repetition, a cycle. The latch was tested, photographed, and compared to hardware catalogs from the mid-20th century. It was officially identified as a model manufactured between 1949 and 1953. The same year, the earliest blueprint had marked room 209 as inaccessible. That wasn't a coincidence. And for the first time, the investigation turned backward, not toward Owen and Lillian, but toward what had happened in room 209 before them. Natalie dug deep into newspaper archives. She found something. An article from 1955 in the Stonebridge Daily Chronicle. The headline read, "Hotel guest missing, last seen on second floor." The man's name was Walter Tim, the manager of the Winton Inn at the time. He had reportedly gone upstairs to check on a leaky pipe in the northwest corner, the same corner where room 209 now stood. He was never seen again. The article was brief. The case closed quickly. Authorities at the time suspected he had skipped town due to financial troubles, but the hotel's owner had a different version. In a handwritten letter recovered from estate files, the owner wrote, "Walter vanished in the walls. I heard him scream once, but by the time we got up there was only concrete." The letter had never been mailed. It sat in a box for 70 years. Investigators began compiling a timeline of disappearances in and around Stonebridge. Names, dates, circumstances. They found a disturbing number of unresolved missing persons cases tied loosely to the area, some as close as the hotel itself. A traveling salesman in 1972, a maid in 1981, a guest who checked in under a false name in 1994 and left all his belongings behind. None of them had stayed in room 209 officially, but all were last seen on the second floor. The working theory shifted. This wasn't a one-time tragedy. This was a place with history, a room with a past, and perhaps a purpose. Natalie, determined to document everything, created a public timeline. It stretched across generations, beginning in 1954 and ending with the Carters. Each entry added weight to a growing idea. Room 209 didn't just witness disappearances, it consumed them. Meanwhile, the plastic camera's final image was digitally enhanced again. This time, something new was found. Underneath the figure's feet, the one standing behind Owen, there was a line, a thin, dark arc that, at first glance, looked like a shadow, but adjusted for contrast and depth, it appeared to be a crack in the cement, as though it had been there before the room was even sealed, like the room had cracked open once and then closed again. One forensic analyst said, "We're not just looking at a sealed space. We're looking at something that's been unsealed and resealed, possibly more than once." Theories flooded back in. But now, they weren't just theories. Concrete, timelines, missing names, forgotten guests. They all pointed in one direction, that room 209 wasn't just a room in a hotel. It was a boundary, a place where something unnatural had happened, not necessarily evil, not necessarily explainable, but undeniably different. That's when Natalie received an email. The sender was anonymous, the email encrypted, the message brief. It read, "I worked the concrete, 2001. Night shift, Paid cash. No idea what we were doing, just filled a space. They said it was for fireproofing. I didn't know there was a room. Attached was a scanned copy of a pay stub. Unmarked, no company name, just a total, $600. The date, March 3rd, 2001. Less than 8 months after the Carters disappeared. The email traced back to a throwaway address. No way to reply, no way to verify. But it confirmed what many had feared. Someone sealed that room deliberately, not out of panic, not out of guilt, but as a kind of final act to contain something or bury it. Investigators tried to find permits for any work done in that window. None existed. No receipts, no blueprints updated. It was as if the work had been commissioned off the books, hidden even from the owners. The building inspector from that year had since passed away, but in his daughter's attic, tucked inside an old filing box, was a personal notebook. One entry stood out, March 2001. It read, "Winton Inn, second floor request denied. Too much noise at night. Unclear floor plan. Told them to seal off access until further notice. He hadn't approved anything. Whatever was done to that room, the ceiling, the cement, had been done without oversight, secretly, quickly, and with a sense of urgency. The timeline now had a new chapter. Owen and Lillian vanish, July 2000. Room 209 sealed, March 2001. No permits, no witnesses, no record, just a layer of cement and silence. When Natalie shared all of this online, the story exploded again. News outlets picked it back up. Paranormal investigators begged for access to the room. The hotel, still under renovation, was forced to install security. And then came the petition. Signed by over 60,000 people, it demanded that Room 209 be opened fully, the concrete removed, that whatever was inside be revealed, investigated, documented. But the authorities hesitated, because if there was something more inside, beneath the concrete, behind the wall, it might be too late to control what came next. Still, public pressure mounted. Eventually, the state agreed. Room 209 would be excavated. They scheduled the excavation for a Thursday morning, July 24th, 2025, almost exactly 25 years to the day since Owen and Lillian Carter had vanished. The crew arrived before dawn. Not construction workers this time, forensic engineers, hazmat personnel, a full investigative team. A mobile lab was parked outside the Winton Inn. Cameras were set up to record every moment, but no press was allowed inside. Room 209 wasn't just a crime scene anymore. It was a sealed time capsule. A question with a door. At 7:03 a.m., the first hammer struck the cement. It didn't crumble easily. The concrete was dense, reinforced in places with metal rods, an odd addition for interior work. It had been poured with precision, forming a solid, airtight tomb. Dust filled the hallway. The sound of drills echoed through the inn. By noon, a section of the wall had been cleared. What they saw behind it was not a room. Not anymore. It was something else. The cement had coated every surface, but deep within, beneath layers of hardened gray, was a space no larger than a walk-in closet. A hollow chamber where a hotel room should have been. The original walls were gone, dissolved, as if the cement hadn't just covered them, but consumed them. And inside that space, crouched in the farthest corner, was something that stopped every heart in the room. A skeleton, partially preserved, curled tightly, knees to chest, arms wrapped around the rib cage, as if whoever it was had tried to make themselves small, to hide, to disappear. There were 2 rings still on the fingers. Dental records confirmed what many feared, but somehow still hoped wasn't true. It was Owen Carter. His body had been inside that room the entire time, sealed, hidden. entombed just feet from where people had walked, laughed, slept. He hadn't vanished. He had been buried, standing upright in the middle of a building that had never stopped breathing around him. There were no signs of blunt force trauma, no broken bones, no evidence of a struggle, just a slow, suffocating death. They believed he had died from oxygen deprivation, sealed in concrete while still alive. But the strangest part wasn't his body. It was what was found beside it. A notebook, Lillian's notebook. The last few pages had been ripped out, but one page remained, and written in shaky, fading ink, just 3 words. He stayed behind. The ink was smeared. The page was torn at the edges, but the handwriting was unmistakably hers. Lillian had been there, and she had left, or had she? Investigators scanned the concrete floor. They removed every layer with painstaking care, but no second body was found, no trace of Lillian's remains, not a hair, not a drop of blood, only that page. She had written it, and then disappeared completely. The news broke that evening. Owen Carter found, Lillian Carter missing. Again. Natalie received the call just after midnight. She didn't cry, not at first. She just stared at the wall and whispered, "He was right there. All this time, he was right there." When she saw the page, she didn't speak for nearly a minute. Then she said, "She must have had a choice. That's what it means. He stayed, but she didn't." But where did she go, and how? Authorities closed the site temporarily. They needed time to process, to test, to understand. But rumors filled the vacuum. Some believed Lillian had escaped through a tunnel, that someone had helped her. Others thought she had been taken separately, that the photo of Owen shielding his eyes was because he was watching her go, or watching something take her. But then someone found something else. Embedded deep in the remaining wall, just above where Owen's head had rested, was a thin metal plate, bolted in with rusted screws. It had been painted over at least twice. No one noticed it at first, but when they pried it loose, there was writing underneath, an inscription, scratched into the metal in uneven lines. It read, "The room listens. It doesn't forget. If you're reading this, don't speak its name." There was no signature, no date, just that message. Natalie posted the inscription to her blog, and thousands of comments followed. Some believed the room itself had become sentient, that decades of pain, fear, and death had imprinted on it, created a force, a memory, a will. Others believed the room was a doorway, not metaphorically, a literal fracture in the rules of place and time, and that Lillian had gone through it. A few thought she had written the message herself, but experts said the plate had been there for decades, long before the Carters had ever walked into the Winton Inn, before Owen taught middle school, before Lillian photographed forgotten places, before anyone thought a room could be hungry. For days, the news replayed the discovery on a loop. Headlines screamed, "Wife vanishes, husband found in sealed hotel room." Talk shows debated whether to tear the rest of the building down. True crime documentaries circled like vultures. But nothing explained the one thing that now haunted everyone. Why did Lillian write, "He stayed behind"? Was it a clue, a goodbye, a warning? Did she escape? Or did the room let her go? They say closure is a gift, but in Stonebridge, closure came wrapped in concrete, grief, and silence. And even then, it was only partial. Owen Carter's remains were buried in the town cemetery beneath a headstone that read, "Beloved son, lost too long." The funeral was private, just family, a few close friends, and Natalie. She read aloud from one of Lillian's old letters, one Owen had carried in his wallet. It ended with a line that felt impossibly cruel now. "No matter where we end up, I want to find the quiet with you." But he hadn't found the quiet. He had found a room with no air, no sound, no light. A prison with walls so thick the world forgot he was inside. And Lillian? She was still gone. No trace, no bones, no blood, not even fingerprints on the page she left behind. Forensic experts examined the notebook. The ink was consistent with the pens she used. The handwriting matched. The pressure of the strokes suggested a rushed moment. Not panic, but urgency. She had written those 3 words, fast. And then she had vanished. There was no tunnel, no back entrance, no loose panel in the wall. Engineers confirmed it. By the time the cement set, there was no physical way in or out, which meant Lillian had either escaped before the room was sealed or had gone somewhere else entirely. And that's the question that continues to pull at the edges of this story. Where did she go? Some believed she was still alive, that somehow she had escaped through a forgotten exit, that she'd gone into hiding or was taken by someone who knew how to disappear. But why wouldn't she contact her family? Why write, "He stayed behind," if she was planning to survive? Others believed she had died in the room, just like Owen, but her body had somehow vanished, dissolved, removed, or taken before the cement was poured. Then there were the ones who thought differently, that Lillian had crossed over, not into death, not into escape, but into something else. The theory gained momentum after a construction worker, part of the demolition crew assigned to finish clearing the second-floor concrete, filed a formal report with his supervisor. He claimed he heard a woman's voice behind the wall, faint, distant, repeating the same phrase. "Don't come back." He said he dropped his tools and left the site immediately. Another worker later said he heard the same thing, only the voice said, "Stay quiet. It listens." No one could confirm these claims. The audio recordings from the day were filled with machinery and noise, but word got out, and fear grew. The state halted further excavation indefinitely. The Winton Inn was declared a historical hazard zone. Room 209 was sealed again, but not with cement this time, with silence. Natalie tried to keep the momentum alive. She launched a foundation in Owen's name, dedicated to investigating long-term disappearances. She still updates her blog, still gets emails, some from people who say they've stayed in rooms that felt wrong. One man wrote that he stayed in a cabin in Utah that had no mirrors, and when he looked out the window, he saw someone sitting on the bed behind him. Another said he found a door in a hotel in Nevada that didn't appear on any floor plan. When he opened it, he felt cold air rush past him, and the sound of sobbing from behind a wall. The stories are endless, frightening, often unbelievable. But Natalie says she reads them all, because once you know a room can erase someone, you stop assuming walls are just walls. The police officially closed the Carter case in December 2025. The file now lists Owen as deceased, cause of death, asphyxiation due to entombment. Lillian is still listed as missing, presumed dead. Natalie doesn't agree. She keeps a small wooden box on her bookshelf. Inside are photographs of her sister, newspaper clippings, and the original copy of the notebook page. She says some nights she dreams of that room, but in her dreams it's always empty. The bed is made, the window open, and sometimes, just before she wakes up, she sees Lillian standing in the hallway, looking back, just looking. Stonebridge changed after the discovery. Locals talk about the inn differently now. It's no longer just the place where that couple disappeared. It's something heavier, a wound in the town's history, a reminder of how close horror can live to ordinary life. The inn still stands, boarded up. Room 209 is quiet again, but the questions remain. Why was that room sealed in 1954? Who wrote the message on the metal plate? Why were so many people drawn to that one space? And how did Lillian Carter leave it? If she left it at all? A few theorists believe we'll never know the full story, because we're not supposed to. That room 209 was never meant to be opened, that it existed as a warning, and by breaking the seal, we invited something back into the world. But most just feel sadness, because the truth isn't always satisfying. Sometimes it's not even complete. We got half an answer, a partial closure, and a permanent mystery. Some stories don't end with justice, or clarity, or closure. Some stories end in silence, in shadows that stretch too far, in rooms sealed too tight, in voices that fade just before they can say why. Owen Carter was 34 when he vanished, a teacher, a husband, a man with a pocket full of receipts and a future full of plans. His final days were ordinary, a road trip, cheap motel coffee, late-night laughter. And yet, somehow, the last chapter of his life was written in cement and stillness. He died alone, inches from the world, from freedom, from help, and no one knew. For 25 years, people walked past that room, slept nearby, laughed, dreamed, argued, lived, while Owen stayed trapped behind a wall built in silence, buried by time. Lillian Carter was 31, and she's still missing. Maybe she escaped. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she left a message because she knew she couldn't take him with her. Maybe he stayed behind was a promise or a confession. We may never know. The hardest part of grief isn't the loss. It's the uncertainty, the inability to say goodbye, the questions that dig deeper the longer they go unanswered. Natalie once said that losing her sister twice, first to the disappearance, then to the mystery, was like watching a photo fade in reverse. She becomes less real the more time passes, like she's turning into a story instead of a person. But Lillian wasn't a story. She was real. A woman who laughed loudly, who wore too many rings, who believed in documenting everything, because she was afraid of forgetting the world, or being forgotten by it. And maybe that's the most tragic part of Room 209. It didn't just swallow lives, it erased them. But here we are, decades later, still speaking their names, still wondering, still asking how a couple on a summer drive could walk into a hotel and never walk out, how a room could be built, sealed, and built again, as if trying to hide something even it couldn't understand, how grief can echo in walls no one can see through, and how sometimes the closest thing to truth is a photo, a man shielding his eyes, frozen in time, as something we'll never understand moved just behind him. In the end, Room 209 remains locked once more, but not because someone hid it, because no one can explain it. Not the cement, not the silence, not the space that once held a bed, a window, and the last trace of two people who never wanted to disappear. We tell stories to make sense of the world, but what do we do when the world refuses to make sense? Maybe we keep asking, maybe we keep looking, and maybe, just maybe, someone watching this remembers something. A hallway? A sound? A moment from 2000, long buried under the dust of memory, because someone, somewhere, must know what happened in that room. And maybe, just maybe, they're still out there. So we leave you with this. What do you think really happened in Room 209?